Hello, everybody. Gary Edelman, American Battlefield Trust on the Wilderness Battlefield, at a place I confess I don't think a lot of people come to. I think people come to the wilderness, they go to the exhibit shelter, they sort of go into Saunders Field and maybe drive some of the park roads here, maybe go to the Widow Tap Field, but I don't think people understand the import of where I stand now, not just during the battle, but right after the battle as well. This is the Plank Road Rock Road intersection. Savage fighting around here, a key decision around here, as well as some terrible moments of battle around here, as well as acts of valor. So we're going to hear a little bit about this. I think people also have the understanding that maybe the 5th Corps and Ewell were fighting sort of to the north of here, and I guess it's Hancock versus Hill or Longstreet down here. Let's disentangle some of this, get it all started with Chris White, who's going to set us up here at this intersection before we take a walk.
Thanks, Gary. So I would counter Gary by saying there's a lot of people who come through here, but not for history. So you notice this is a very busy intersection. And let's go, as I always say, from the 50,000 down to the 500 feet. So we're in the wilderness right now. We're at the Brock Road, Plank Road intersection, where you see this white truck. He's driving along the orange Plank Road, turning left up the Brock Road towards the north. Brock Road runs north to south. That's modern-day Route 613. Running east to west is going to be the Orange Plank Road, modern-day Route 621. There are other roads coming through this area, but most importantly is this intersection. That intersection for the Federals will lead you south to Spotsylvania Courthouse, about 8 miles below where we are standing is the next intersection on the way to Richmond, Virginia, which is the Confederate capital. For the Confederates, if they take this intersection and go up the road, up the Brock Road, they can threaten the rear of the Federals. They can also threaten the Federal left flank. Because what has happened is the Union Army has moved across the Rapidan River at 2 places, Germanna Ford, Ely's Ford. 2/3 of the Army comes across Germanna Ford because that's closest to the enemy. That is closest to the Confederates. Well, another 1/3 of the Army comes across Ely's Ford, marches across the Chancellorsville battlefield, swings down to my left, and then eventually doubles back towards where we are standing, towards this intersection. Because what Ulysses S. Grant and George Gordon Meade, the 2 principal Federal commanders here in the East, are trying to do is move through this area in about 2 days, known as the Wilderness, go towards the west, engage with Robert E. Lee's army, grapple with Lee's army, and keep him in position, while other Union armies will land body blows on the Southern Confederacy at places like Red River, Bermuda Hundred, out in the Shenandoah Valley. So the idea is to take Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia off the table. Lee, in the meantime, is moving his army up 2 parallel roads. 5 miles to the north of us is the Orange Turnpike. Right here is the Orange Plank Road. Come into this area, try to seize this intersection if we're Lee, turn to the north, as well as use the wilderness to nullify Grant and Meade's numbers. 118,000 Federal soldiers versus 64,000-ish Confederates. That's the idea. May 5th, there is fighting in this vicinity. Grant and Meade will make contact with the Confederates up at a place called Saunders Field. We had a video up there earlier. Please check that out. Then they're going to look at their map and see that this intersection is exposed. They're going to go to a division led by George Washington Getty from the Union 6th Army Corps and tell Getty to come into this intersection. He is supposed to seize this intersection while Winfield Scott Hancock's 25,000-man 2nd Army Corps marches here, consolidates the position, and then attacks the Confederates. That's the idea. Getty will be riding down here with about half dozen staff officers. He will have his pistols drawn, he'll have his guidons out, and it's just he and his staff officers, and they will come into this intersection. They'll look down the road and they will see fleeing Union soldiers. Those would be the men from the 5th New York Cavalry from John Hammond's command. That's the only thing standing between Getty and Henry Heath's Confederate division. Heath finally brushes those men aside. Getty is ready with his half dozen or so men to stand against the Confederates. And then what will happen is Getty's lead brigade under Frank Wheaton will come into this intersection, front face, fire, and this intersection is now held by the Federals for the next 72 hours. They won the race to the Brock Road, Plank Road intersection. More Union soldiers will arrive into this vicinity. Some of those men will be from Vermont. We'll talk about them in a moment. More of them will come from the old Union 3rd Army Corps now consolidated with the Union's 2nd Corps. They'll move to the north of us, led by Alexander fighting Alec Hayes, and he will lead a counterattack into the woods where Hayes is killed in action. Hayes, according to one account, was wearing green pants of the United States sharpshooters. He's a brigadier general, went to West Point with Ulysses S. Grant, hard fighter, hard drinker, according to some of his men. And allegedly, as he is pushing through those woods, he carried 2 canteens with him, one filled with whiskey, one filled with water. As he went to take a swig of whiskey, he threw his head back into a bullet, and his brain was splattered on this battlefield by a mini ball. When Hayes goes down, Grant later is shaken because they were classmates. Hayes was a hard fighter. He's the same man after Pickett's charge who would take Confederate flags and ride them up and down the Union lines, trailing them behind his horse. Grant is so moved by his death that whenever he is running for president in the 1860s, Grant will go to Pittsburgh as fighting in Alec's hometown and actually go to his gravesite to visit the grave as well as the widow of Alexander Hayes. So there'll be tough fighting up there. There'll be more fighting here, but what I want to point out before we start to walk here in just a moment is that this Brock Road is now going to be the main north-south line for the Federals. The Federal line will run for a few more miles down in that direction. The left flank of the Federal line will end 1.5 miles to 2 miles below us. The right flank will run up the road for another 3/4 or so of a mile. Then, over time, we will stack more and more Federals into this position. By the end of the battle, there are 3 or 4 rows of Federals here from the Union's 2nd, the 5th, the 6th, and the 9th Corps, bolstered by artillery. So this will be a very tough nut to crack as this battle goes on. But on May the 5th, it's a seesaw action, and we'll get into some of that action by taking a walk down through here. Dan Davis is going to talk to us a little bit about the road network that carried both of these armies here. Dan?
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Gary. Hello there, everyone. Let's take a little bit of a walk through the wilderness. Now, we've been talking about, throughout our 160th coverage of the Overland campaign, why battles are fought. Gary talked about this yesterday. Go back and watch our video in the Widow Tap Field. How did the armies get here? It's because of the roads. The roads are going to impact how the armies fight. We just talked about the Brock Road, Plank Road intersection, and it's probably, as we discussed, arguably the most important intersection militarily in the world on May 5th and May 6th, 1864. Because as the battle develops, if Robert E. Lee can take that intersection, he's going to do 2 things. He's going to block Ulysses S. Grant's road to the south along the Brock Road, but he's also going to cut the Army of the Potomac in 2 because we have Winfield Scott Hancock making a circuitous route from Ely's Ford and the old Chancellorsville battlefield coming up from the south. But fortunately for the Federals, they hold the intersection and Hancock is able to reach this area and link up with the rest of the army. But I think you can go back and you can follow the first week and a half to 2 weeks of fighting here in the wilderness in Spotsylvania by just examining the various road networks and the various intersections. Obviously, we have the Brock Road, Plank Road intersection. Farther to the south, we have the intersection of the Catherine Furnace Road and the Brock Road. Now, despite a strong Confederate cavalry presence out here on May 5th and 6th in the form of Thomas Rosser's brigade, the Federal cavalry is able to hold that intersection going into the morning of May 7th as the Battle of the Wilderness is winding down. Farther to the south, and we'll talk about this in another video, we have the intersection of the Brock Road and the Catharpin Road, in the area, the small hamlet known as Todd's Tavern. And that road intersection is going to draw those cavalry forces to it on May the 7th. And there's going to be a sharp fight at Todd's Tavern. Farther to the south, you have the roads intersecting at Spotsylvania Courthouse, another major road network that the Federals will hope to hold if they can then open the road to Richmond. Beyond that, there's the area around Massaponax Church, where the road from Spotsylvania intersects with modern Route 1 and the main road to Richmond. So if you're coming out here to visit these battlefields, I think a good introduction would be to take a look at these road networks and how they influence the fighting and the decisions made by the commanders on both sides.
So we're walking through one of the pathways here in the wilderness, and this is an area that was reclaimed by the National Park Service back in the early 2000s. Senator Jeffords from Vermont appropriated $200,000 to help put in this walking trail, parking area, and to really get all the interpretation down here for this Brock Road Plank Road intersection. And one of the reasons he does this is he's from the state of Vermont, and the state of Vermont brigade who fight here, the 1st Vermont Brigade, will sustain the highest number of casualties of any federal brigade, 1,269 casualties on the wilderness battlefield, even though the monument up ahead says 1,234 casualties. The Vermont Brigade monument was placed here because Senator Jeffords and others really wanted to memorialize the Vermont, sacrifice of the Vermont Brigade. And if you ever go to the State House up in Montpelier, you will see a huge painting from Cedar Creek. There's the Civil War room. It's a really interesting state house to go over to. But this monument was placed here and dedicated in 2006. Actually, Dan Davis, our staff, was here on site that day when we were part of the National Park Service. And the monument costs about $42,000. It stands 7 feet high at its peak, and that what you're seeing at the top is Camel Hump. Camel's Hump is a mountain in Vermont, a very prominent mountain. If you've ever been to Vermont, you know of it. So the highest peak here on the monument puts this monument at 7 feet tall. So this is down here in the area where the Vermont Brigade fought on May 5th and the 6th of 1864. They're going to see a lot of action throughout the Overland campaign, and they're also going to help break the siege lines at Petersburg on April 2nd, 1865. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on our Sarah K. Byerly, who wants to talk a little bit about the Vermont Brigade down here in the wilderness at Wilderness.
So we've talked about the fight, the importance of holding the Brock Road, Orange Plank Road intersection. And as Chris mentioned, Getty's division and the brigades that form that division are going to be an important part of holding that area. One of those brigades is the Vermont Brigade. It's actually the 2nd Brigade in the 2nd Division of the 6th Corps. It's commanded by General Ulysses A. Grant here at the battle, and the Vermont Brigade is going to include the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th Vermont regiments. These regiments go back in war history. They're formed in 1861, and they're going to play a really important role here at the Wilderness. Now, many units take heavy casualties in the Battle of the Wilderness, but the Vermont Brigade is going to be 1/10 of the casualties of the Union Army at this battle. And as the fighting is seesawing back and forth, you have the Vermont Brigade taking part in attacks, defenses, counterattacks, and they talk about the denseness of the forest. They can't see who they're fighting at. They're firing at flashes of musket fire, rifle fire ahead of them. And there's a lot of accounts that come out of the fighting here. The soldiers write about their reminiscence of it. And in the 6th Vermont Regiment, there was actually a father and son fighting together. 18-year-old Private Henry Wright is gut shot here at the battle. And just shortly after he's mortally wounded, his father, Private David Wright, is wounded also. His father's wounded in the eyes. He can't see, and he's wandering through the wilderness. He's eventually found by a soldier from New York, rescued, taken to a field hospital. The father will survive, but the son will not. And it's stories like these that bring that human cost of war into focus for us as we're studying places like the wilderness. Now, the Vermont Brigade engages on both May 5th and May 6th, and that night, surviving comrades are going out into the dense woods, trying to find their wounded comrades. They're searching in the dark. At least one group tried to go out holding a candle, but that draws fire from the Confederates who see them searching. And Soldier Luther Harris would later write, "It was the saddest night the Vermonters had ever known." They'll engage again the following day on May 6th. And General Lewis Grant, when he receives the orders that the Vermont Brigade is to advance again and take part in more attacks, he would later write, "To me personally, the order came like a death warrant." Erie Diddy is a soldier in the 6th Vermont, and he would later write about this, "It was a terrible slaughter, but we had a man at the head who intended to win if it took every man in the army." And there he's reflecting on General Ulysses S. Grant and the decision that Grant is going to make in the very intersection that these Vermont soldiers have helped to defend. And I won't steal the thunder by telling that story. I think some others want to share it with you as well. you know that I often like to reflect on what's happened on the battlefield and how it reverberates to the home front. On May 7th, the day after this intense fighting for these Vermonters here in the wilderness, one of the newspapers back home in Vermont writes, "The spring campaign has begun in Virginia. The Army of the Potomac started on Tuesday night, crossed the Rapidan, and a great battle commenced. What will be the result? It is yet too soon to predict." Things hang in the balance in the wilderness along Orange Plank Road. Things hang in the balance in this campaign that will become called the Overland Campaign of 1864. And what happens here at the wilderness is not the end of that campaign. The fighting will continue on, and decisions that are made here on the ground that is fought over will impact that. Chris?
Thanks, Sarah. I just want to mention, the numbers here are always subjective whenever we talk about Civil War battlefields. We talk about the highest number of casualties, most this, the least that. And it's always difficult to come up with the exact numbers because, in fact, the Vermont Brigade, according to one account, took 1,269 casualties. According to their monument, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. They claim they have the highest number of casualties, but in my research on wilderness, I found that Alexander Hayes's brigade up north of the Orange Plank Road sustained 1,390 casualties. So there's always this recalculation of numbers, and even in the post-war years, a lot of these veterans, trying to show the duty that they had done through casualties will sometimes, inflate numbers or miscalculate numbers, not always on purpose. This was such a problem in the Confederate Army that Robert E. Lee actually has to order his men in 1862 to stop showing that they've sustained so many casualties, because the Southerners thought that the more casualties they sustain, the better they look in the reports and other things. So we don't always have an accurate number of losses. And before we start walking to our final stop, I just wanted to mention Alexander Hayes one more time. He's one of my favorites to talk about. And I just wanted to read you a account of his death. According to Private John Haley of the 17th Maine, he said, "Major West, our regimental commander of the 17th Maine, was wounded in the thigh and sent to the rear. Other officers were put off their pins, and General Alexander Hayes, our brigade commander, was instantly killed while leading his troops. He was a really brave old fellow, or perhaps a reckless one might be a better term. He once commanded a division, but in recent reorganization, he was reduced to a brigade command, where it is said no brains are needed. We are not under Hayes long enough to know him well. He was continually soaked or steeped in whiskey, and it was to this article that he was indebted to his death. There is no saying that he might not have been killed anyway, but I can say that the particular bullet would not have killed him, except that the strap on his canteen became entangled, and as he tried to adjust his mouth to the canteen, the bullet went through his head." So there'll be a lot of different accounts that take place down here, these soldiers writing about what happens after the war. Private John Haley, who has a fantastic memoir that was edited years ago, will give you a lot of insights into the old 3rd Corps as well as the 2nd Corps along the way. And I think we're going to take a little walk here. Gary's going to come on. We're going to start walking down the trail here, heading over to a little special surprise for you as well.
Thanks, Chris. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're on the Wilderness Battlefield. We are near the Orange Plank Road, Brock Road intersection. Just talked about some Vermonters, and here we are checking out a different part of the battlefield. What I wanted to add, and I'm going to get close up so the cameraman doesn't have to go through the leaves. Let's see, or we could do it this way. Let's see. There we go. Is this idea that Chris was talking about the difficulty of counting casualties, even taking outside the human error or human bias of wanting their unit to look better. There's this real problem of counting. I mean, you're counting once a month. The Confederate War Department burns up. It's very difficult to know who's even in the Army, let alone on which day of which battle they suffered casualties, and whether it's a mortal wound versus a killed. Very difficult. But I think Sarah is always so good about saying that this is a lot more than numbers. Chris, Sarah, and Dan got into this yesterday. These terrible stories that whether it be 1269 or 1234 in the Vermont Brigade, which, by the way, I think is, this is not unusual for them. I think they suffer more than any other brigade during the Civil War by some counts. That it comes down to the human level. Alexander Hayes, Micah Jenkins, Longstreet's wound, James Wadsworth, and, And bringing it down to some of these individual privates is really what we have to strive to do during the Civil War, is we try to understand not only the movements and the outcomes, but the individuals. Imagine 1,234 stories in one battle, in one brigade. So I think it's important that you go off on your own journeys to try to understand some of these things. And with that, I'll leave you to ponder it and pass it back to Chris White.
Yeah, and talk about individuals. This was not planned. Gary actually has a perfect transition to the sign up ahead. Gary, or Andy, you can just turn and face that. No one needs to see me. This is going to show the horrors of war down here in the wilderness. So let's bring this all together, and then we'll take you over to a often not seen monument. This talks about Elmira Patterson. She is the wife of John Patterson, who's the colonel of the 102nd Pennsylvania Infantry. They're a veteran regiment. What's interesting about John Patterson and his story is that there were two cemeteries established here in the wilderness after the battle, before the bodies are moved of federal soldiers to Maurice Heights and the National Cemetery there. Patterson is killed in action here in the wilderness, and his body is laid to rest in its first resting spot here in the wilderness. And there's a board painted white with black lettering placed on it to denote his name, and that's his headstone, as you will, or headboard. But what we're fortunate with is that is the only remaining headboard from the wilderness cemeteries that we know of. So we have an idea, we have some pictures of these old headboards out in these cemeteries that were established not far from here, but Patterson's is the only one that we still have. One of my friends, Jamie Price, who lives out in Ohio, he actually has his ancestors' headboard from Chattanooga's original cemetery. It's only one of 2 or 3 I've ever seen that still exist, because they're made out of wood. Sometimes they're discarded. They wash away because it's painted in whitewash and black paint. They deteriorate over time. So Patterson, who's killed out here on the battlefield, he's able to be identified because his headboard actually survived. In the Fredericksburg National Cemetery, there's more than 15,000 soldiers buried in there, but the vast majority are unknowns. Either they were buried without a headboard, or their headboard, as I mentioned, washed away, things like that. You couldn't find it. So the wilderness itself, too, will claim many victims because of fires that will sweep through here. We'll talk about that here in just a few moments, that will just tear bodies to pieces, unfortunately. We'll have soldiers who are killed, left for dead. Animals and time take over, and you just find skeletons out here. So there are many unknowns out here in the wilderness. And where we're standing is right in the middle of the battlefield. Let's bring this together before we walk to our last little stop. We have Confederates behind the camera. That's to the west. You're facing out to the east. The Union line is roughly right where we're standing. That will be Winfield Scott Hancock's 2nd Corps. They will be stacked up on the afternoon of May 6th after an attack from James Longstreet. Learn more about that in another video. Confederates will come down the Orange Plank Road. They'll come up out of a railroad cut. They will push Hancock's men back to this point. James Longstreet, Lee's second in command's wounded. Confederates are all tangled up. Longstreet's down. It takes till about 4 o'clock in the afternoon for the Confederates to get everyone back online, and then basically make a human wave assault right over top of this area where the Federals will be defending. This area will have earthen fortifications known as breastworks. Some of them are knee-high, some of them are chest-high. That's where you get the name breastworks from. But they will be using a lot of felled trees, old trees, and whenever they build up these earthen fortifications, they're using these trees that were very dry and old. It's an unseasonably hot, unseasonably dry spring. So whenever the fighting takes place here, they fire their guns, cannonballs explode, the leaves, and you can see how many leaves are out here today. These all start to burn. They'll carry with the wind eastward, because the wind was blowing from west to east that day, and start to engulf the Union fortifications in flames. Confederates will charge forward, and some men said it was like Dante's Inferno as the Confederates came through the flames up over and into the works. Mother Nature will break that line for the Confederates, as well as the weight of this Confederate assault. So this whole place is going to start to smell acrid of smoke. There's going to be a huge conflagration of these leaves. The earthworks are burning up. And to make matters worse, if you're a Union soldier, many of them will pack their backpacks and other personal effects up along those earthen fortifications to give them a little bit of extra protection. and now all of their personal belongings are starting to burn as these Confederates come up and over top of them. So let's take a walk to our last little stop here as we go along. You're with the American Battlefield Trust, and we hope that you'll click that like button, click the subscribe button, and head over to battlefields.org. You can learn more about what we do, and we're always working to help preserve battlefield lands, especially down here in Central Virginia. And wilderness is just part of one unit of the Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park. You have Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, Wilderness, and Spotsylvania. They cover 18 months of war. This is going to this area of 60 square miles or so will sustain some 100,000 casualties over those 18 months. This is some of the bloodiest ground in American history and on the North American continent. You have the stories of soldiers down here at Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park, the civilians. There's an entire city caught in the crossfire of numerous battles, 1st and 2nd Fredericksburg. So be sure, if you ever get a chance to, take that drive up or down I-95, get off the exit and start to visit some of these battlefields. There are visitor centers at Chancellorsville and at Fredericksburg. And to learn more about what you can do here, we have a battle app. And of course, we have our step-in videos that'll step you right into the famed sunken road at Fredericksburg. And we have all kinds of other assets that you can take advantage of. So as we walk up here, you might start to hear some traffic. You can see the Brock Road. That's modern day Route 613 running north to south. That is basically the Union defensive line. We're going to walk up towards some of the fortifications here. And you might not know that they're here, but the Union Army fortified this position. I'm going to go around the sign here, Andy. And as we go around, as you drive up and down Brock Road, this will take you to Spotsylvania. Off to my right, the camera's right. Off to my left, it'll take you up to Chancellorsville. It'll also take you up to the Brock Road, Plank Road intersection. So as we're down here along the Brock Road, what we're going to do is show you a really cool unknown marker to most people, but to get to it, we actually have to take a little walk up the earthworks and back down so we don't walk over top of them and damage them. So we'll be right back. All right, so we walked up and back down the Brock Road here, and I wanted to show you one of the few markers out here on the Wilderness Battlefield. There's about 9 actual monuments on the battlefield, but this is known as an end marker. This is one of the only ones that are located on the battlefield today, and these were placed by the National Park Service back in the 1940s or 50s. We don't know a lot about these end markers, and one of the reasons they're called end markers is because they always point north. You can see the arrow. It says WN14, that means Wilderness End Marker. This is number 14. Where 1 through 13 are, we don't know. But this is going to tell you that Hancock's Federal trenches, which are right over here to my left, just over top of these works, were here from May 5th through 7th, 1864. So this is the idea of marking the battlefield. We guesstimate that there were somewhere around 50 to 60 of these on the various battlefields here at Wilderness, Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania, and Chancellorsville. But unfortunately, as you notice, they are here at ground level. And with all of these leaves and things, they get covered up. Plus, we don't have a known map of any of these. We were able to locate 7 or 8 of them on the Spotsylvania battlefield. This one has been located. It's also been hit at some point, probably by a lawnmower, because you can see a chunk taken out of it. There are others that have been allegedly found but never refound on the Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville battlefield. But this is one of the unknown markers, or one of those lesser known markers, as I should say, here in the wilderness. So it's a really cool way of covering up or interpreting the trenches. And of course, we have our other sign that says Federal Trenches, Hancock's Corps. And those are the more prominent features you see on the various battlefields. With that, we are going to wrap up this video, and we're then going to jump to another video, which we hope you'll join us for, that wraps up the Wilderness Battle and moves us on with Ulysses S. Grant and Robert E. Lee down to Spotsylvania Courthouse and this Overland campaign 160th anniversary. I really want to thank you and encourage you to get out here to the Brock Road, Plank Road intersection, walk around here, and of course, head over to battlefields.org, learn more about what we do hit that like and subscribe button here on YouTube, and please share this with your friends and family. On behalf of the American Battlefield Trust, Dan Davis, Sarah Byerly, Andy behind the camera, Gary Edelman, I'm Chris White. Thank you for watching, and thank you for supporting battlefield education and preservation.
Hello, this is Trace Atkins. To stay up to date on all the latest and coolest videos, please subscribe to the Trust YouTube channel. Preserve, educate, inspire.